What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Knives of the Round Table. My name is Marco, and today we're going to be talking about the Medford knife and tool Slim Midi. So, about 6 months ago, thereabouts, I got the opportunity to buy this knife through the Centurion Club. For those of you who don't know what the Centurion Club is, it's a free club that you can join through the Medford website. And what you have to do is you have to go through the courses of Medford University. That's what Greg Medford calls it. And it's a series of videos that talk to you about how they make their knives, the steels, the heat treatment, the milling process. So basically, it educates you on producing knives. And they've got like quizzes and that kind of stuff. And at the end, you graduate from Medford University and you become part of the Centurion Club. And what that gives you is, it gives you access to specific invitations and offers that are not available for a lot of people. And one of them was this. So they did the Slim Midi, and you could basically choose how you want to make it. If you go to the Medford website, you see, that you have, for some of the regular production models, you can choose a lot of their stuff. But this is the first time that they use Magnacut. So one of the things that you have to learn in Medford University is that they never stamp the full steel on their blades. They do, for instance, this is a Midi Marauder, and you see the S right there. And the S means S35VN. And the M means Magnacut. So it's the first time that they offered a knife in Magnacut. So I jumped at the opportunity to get one of the knives in Magnacut. I didn't have a Slim Midi, which was the knife that they were offering. I didn't have a tanto blade of Greg Medford, so I did that. So that's what you have here. So let me give you a tour of the knife of what we got here. So you have a tanto blade with a compound grind here between these two, kind of a drop at the top. Again, this is Magnacut. It is so this is a Slim Midi, so a lot of it is very slim, and I'll show you some size comparisons here in a little bit. You've got the thumb cutout for deployment. So this one is the one that I chose. It's faced and flamed is what he calls it, with flamed hardware. So it's titanium in the back. You don't get a lock bar insert. It's a carbonized face. You've got your pocket clip, some back spacers. There's pretty heavily internally milled this, and you've got an over travel stop over on this side, kind of like what you got in a Rick Kinder, like a lockback stabilizer back here. So that's what you've got here. So that's the knife, and let me give you some size comparisons here. So against the Para 2 and the Para 3, so very much in length, it's very much a full-size knife, kind of like what the Para 2 is. Even the sharpened blade length is very similar, because they both have a forward choil that kind of takes away some of the sharpened blade length. So, but I'll show you here, thickness-wise, the Slim Midi is much slimmer. It pays homage to its name. And let me show you. Well, I'll show you here in thickness. So it's very much in line in thickness with the Benchmade bug out. I'll show you here. So that's the two thicknesses compared of the knife. So it carries very slim in the pocket, and that was the goal. But it is a little bit taller and a little bit longer than the bug out, so it doesn't quite disappear in your pocket, kind of like a bug out does, but much more than a Para 2. Now, the final size comparisons that I'm gonna do is against the Midi Marauder. So the this is the Slim Midi Marauder, and this is the Midi Marauder. So what you have here is, after they came up with the Midi Marauder, a lot of people wanted a slimmer, more pocket-friendly, lighter version of the knife, so they went with the Slim Midi. So this one's drop point, so it's not quite the same, but you can see they're identical lengths, but the biggest difference obviously comes in this direction, right? You got much thicker blade stock here than you got here, much thicker handle scale, the scales on the Marauder, on the Midi, and there's no internal milling on the Midi Marauder. So in hand, they feel like completely different knives. This one is much slimmer, much lighter, and in the pocket it kind of disappears. This one feels a lot more solid, a lot more robust. This knife does. So that's kind of your size comparisons, and I wanted to kind of get into the review. So let's start with ergonomics, and the ergonomics are okay. I certainly one of the better ergonomics in a Medford knife, and I don't know if it's I think it might be a factor that this one is not as thick as a lot of other Medfords and not as boxy. So this one, it doesn't quite feel as ergonomic as a Grimsmo Norseman, but it's in that kind of vein where it's very thin, very slim, a little bit taller in that dimension. So the ergonomics are decent. Certainly one of the better ergonomics on a Medford knife that I've felt. In a hammer grip really good, in a saber grip really good. It has a fairly neutral handle, so a lot of different grips work for this knife. So the ergonomics are decent. It's not a melt in your hand kind of a thing just because it's a very neutral handle, but certainly if you're used to like a Micro Praetorian, a Praetorian Genesis, a Midi Marauder, or any of those knives, this certainly has better ergonomics. I wear large gloves, and this one actually feels a lot better than those knives in my hand. So while I wouldn't say that it's the best ergonomics on a knife, I would say it's probably the best ergonomics I've felt on a Medford knife. Kind of probably in the same neighborhood as, they feel differently, but in the same, let's say, in the same grade as the Smooth Criminal, kind of there. So next, cutting. So cutting, obviously, the biggest thing here is that it's a slim knife. So let me show you here. That's the blade comparison against the Parrot 2. And you can see that the blade stock on the Parrot 2 is a good 20 to 30% thicker. Let me show you against the bug out here. So it's a tad bit thicker than the bug out, but you can see that I can fit it in the space between scales. So it's a little bit thicker than the bug out, but not by much, just by a tiny little bit. So what that means is that this is a fairly slicey knife. It's not as slicey as a bug out, and so it feels a little bit like the Parrot 2. And the reason is that even though the Parrot 2 has a thicker blade stock, the Parrot 2 has a full flat grind from the top to the bottom, and this one carries the flat to about halfway down, and then you've got a hollow grind down here. So this is certainly much better for shallow cuts and utility cuts, especially with a point that you can draw, that you can draw cut on the Tanto tip. This tip that is very good for opening packages or for cutting a very precise shallow cut. But this one, because the blade is very thin, you can push cuts and through cuts is actually fairly slicey. Probably the slicest Medford that it's out there, as far as I know. I have a Smooth Criminal, I have a Midi Marauder, I've had a Genesis and a Micro Praetorian. This is certainly the sliciest Medford I have, and it's due to the very thin blade. And I'm so glad that they did it in Magnacut. one of my biggest knocks on Medford knives is that they're really expensive knives. They're $600-700 knives. They're super expensive, and for the longest time they used D2, and then they kind of moved to S35VN, and then for some of the exclusive, like DLT exclusives, they use S90V, but those were like $800 or $900, so like very, very expensive knives. So I always felt that at $500 or $600 you expected a little bit better than S35VN, that is kind of a vanilla steel. But now they've gone to Magnacut, and Magnacut is kind of like, so it was developed by Dr. Thomas, Darren Thomas, Knife Steel Nerds. Really good reads, especially if you're a steel snob that wants to know more about edge retention from an actual person that knows what they're doing. He's a metallurgist, and he developed Magnacut, and Magnacut is it has a little bit better edge retention, with better toughness, with better corrosion resistance. It strikes that balance, without sacrificing much. So it's a really good steel. So the fact that they use Magnacut for this is the reason that I jumped on the Centurion exclusive that this is. So very good blade, very slicey, and I'm very glad that I was able to get this. Now, fit and finish is, this one is a personal preference. There's nothing wrong with the knife, but let me tell you what my problem is here. So this is faced and flamed, and I don't know if as a result of that, the interface between the flat and the hollow, this line right here, it seems that it's been rounded, and that. It's not a crisp transition. And what I mean by that is, look at that. Look at the transition between the hollow grind and the flat right here. It's a very crisp, you can see it right there. The full flat is reflective, while the hollow, immediately you can tell a very crisp line. You see that? But here, let me try and show you this. You never get that, because you see it reflects that rounded edge that you see between the hollow and the flat grind. So it feels like they did a buffing wheel or something that kind of rounds the corners, and maybe that's a a result of the face inflamed, but it does feel like they rounded all of the transition corners here. If you see a Riyadh knife, the transition between this and that is a lot more crisp. Now, because if you follow my channel for any length of time, you know that I like stouter, heavier knives. I always say that I like the feeling of solidity, and that is not here. If you want the light Medford, this is the knife for you, but it feels very un-Medford like. The scales, they feel hollow. They feel, I'm not going to say weak, because you can't flex them. They're, I'm sure they're plenty strong, but they do feel hollow. They, the milling feels very extensive. It feels very light. If you're looking for light Medford, this is the one for you. But there's a feeling of the Midi Marauder, of having these solid scales, that just feels really, really indestructible in your hand. You don't get that feeling of invincibility from these scales. They feel a lot hollow. I think that the quality is still there. I think there's nothing wrong with the fit and finish of it, other than, as I said, I think these transitions, but the feeling of it in hand, it feels like a less quality knife than this. And it is, I know it's probably a nitpick, and it's probably, it's hard when you have to nitpick something that is deliberately designed to be that way, right? This is deliberately designed to be slimmer, thinner, and lighter. But that's a nitpick for me. You know, the Grimstone Norseman is also a slim knife, you know, and it does have internal milling, but it doesn't feel the way this one does. This one feels like they took it a little bit too far with the internal milling. So I would say that that's kind of that probably sums up my airing of grievances. The rounded corners at the transition between the different faces of the blade. That would be probably the biggest one. And the fact that this doesn't feel solid, it doesn't feel like a Medford knife. You know, I've had a number of Medfords. My favorite is the Midi Marauder. Probably a close second is the Micro Praetorian. I have a Smooth Criminal. I've had a Praetorian Genesis, and this one feels even less stout than the Smooth Criminal, which is aluminum. So I think I'll say the same thing that I've always said with Medford knives. I own 5 of them. I own a Theseus. I own a bunch of them, and I will say the same thing that I always say. I like them a lot. I think they do a good job. I think they're a great object. This one in particular is a great cutting tool. I think they're overpriced. I think they're probably at least $150 overpriced, kind of across the board, at least. Especially, you know, when you don't have, you know, you can't take it apart because all of it is proprietary tools. You don't have a lock bar insert. It's running on washers, not on bearings. You have a number of things that I think should be present on a knife at this price point. But I love the design, and I love the knives, and I've paid a lot of money for my knives. This one is the Monkey Edge Frag Pattern exclusive, and I just love these knives. I do think they're overpriced, and because it's my money, I can do with my money as I please. But if you're looking for value, I don't think that there's value in these knives. But if you're looking for kind of the sliciest Medford, I'd probably go with the drop point on the Slim Midi. But you know, like I said, if you're looking for the sliciest version of the Medford, I think this is probably where you want to go. Well, guys, hopefully you've enjoyed it. Hopefully this is helpful. If you do, then like and subscribe. Don't get notified. Nobody likes to receive more emails. You know where to find my content if you want to see it. And until you see you at the next one, take care.